Welcome to this journey of one of the most disturbing cases in recorded history in the Appalachian Mountains of West Virginia. Before we begin, I invite you to leave a comment about where you're watching from and the exact time you heard this story. We're interested in knowing where and at what times of day or night these documented accounts arrive. In the autumn of 1899, deep within the hollows of Tucker County, West Virginia, the Carter family became the subject of what would later be described in hushed tones as the most psychologically devastating case of domestic isolation ever documented in the region. The events that unfolded at their remote homestead near the headwaters of Cheat River would haunt investigators for decades, not because of supernatural occurrences, but because of the profoundly human darkness that emerged from complete social disconnection. The Carter residence stood approximately 12 miles northeast of Parsons, accessible only by a narrow dirt path that wound through dense stands of hemlock and oak. The nearest neighbor, according to county tax records from 1898, lived over 4 miles away across treacherous terrain that became impassable during winter months. This isolation, initially sought by the family patriarch as a refuge from the industrialization creeping into West Virginia, would become the foundation for events that challenged every assumption about human behavior under extreme psychological pressure. Samuel Carter, aged 43 in 1899, had purchased the 160-acre tract through a federal land grant program designed to encourage settlement in remote Appalachian regions. His wife, Martha, was 38, and they shared the homestead with Samuel's younger brother, Thomas, aged 35, and Martha's sister, Elizabeth, aged 28. The family had moved to the location in spring of 1898, seeking what Samuel described in letters to his former employer in Charleston as honest work away from the corruption of coal towns and railroad greed. The first indication that something unusual was occurring at the Carter homestead came from William Brennan, a traveling merchant who made rounds through the mountain communities selling dry goods and collecting mail. Brennan's route typically brought him to the Carter property once every 6 weeks during warm months. In October 1899, he filed a formal complaint with the Tucker County Sheriff's Office, stating that during his most recent visit, the family's behavior had become unnaturally altered, and that he felt unwelcome in a manner that suggested fear rather than rudeness. According to Brennan's written statement preserved in the Tucker County Historical Archives and discovered during a 1962 building renovation, the Carters had always been reserved but cordial during his previous visits. However, during his October call, he observed several disturbing changes. The family members would not make eye contact with him or with each other. When he asked about purchasing supplies, they communicated through whispers and hand gestures, as if speaking aloud was forbidden. Most unsettling, Brennan noted, was that the 4 adults moved about their property in a specific pattern, never allowing more than 2 people to be in the same area simultaneously and never turning their backs to the main house. The merchant's report might have been dismissed as the exaggeration of an outsider unfamiliar with mountain customs, except that it coincided with other documented observations. Reverend James McKinley of the Parsons Presbyterian Church noted in his parish records that the Carters had stopped attending Sunday services in September 1899, after being regular attendees since their arrival. More significantly, they ceased their monthly trips to town for supplies, despite the approach of winter making such preparations essential for survival. Dr. Henry Whitman, the only medical practitioner serving the remote mountain communities, recorded in his journal entries from November 1899 that he had been summoned to the Carter property twice in late autumn. The calls came not from the family themselves, but from Thomas Carter, who would appear at Dr. Whitman's office in Parsons without explanation, request that the doctor come immediately, then disappear, before providing any details about the nature of the medical emergency. When Dr. Whitman arrived at the homestead, he found the family in what he described as a state of collective nervous exhaustion. None of the four adults showed signs of physical illness, but their psychological condition alarmed him. In his medical notes, he documented that they seemed to be operating under an elaborate system of unspoken rules. Meals were eaten in shifts, with different family members taking turns as observers. No one slept in the same room twice in succession. Most disturbing to the doctor was his observation that the family appeared to be monitoring something within their own house with the intensity of sentries guarding against an enemy. The doctor's attempts to understand the family's condition were met with polite but absolute resistance. When he asked direct questions about their health, they would defer to one another in a circular pattern that prevented any individual from providing a complete answer. Samuel would gesture toward Martha, who would look to Elizabeth, who would nod toward Thomas, who would return attention to Samuel. This pattern continued until Dr. Whitman realized that he was witnessing a calculated method of avoiding communication while maintaining the appearance of cooperation. What disturbed Dr. Whitman most profoundly was not what the family said, but what they avoided. In his journal, he noted that during his visits, none of the Carters ever mentioned the interior of their house. Conversations, when they occurred, focused exclusively on external matters: the weather, the condition of their crops, the health of their livestock. When the doctors suggested moving their discussion indoors due to cold November weather, the family insisted on remaining outside, even as snow began to fall. The breakthrough in understanding the Carter family's situation came through an unexpected source. In December 1899, a severe early blizzard trapped Dr. Whitman at the homestead overnight. Unable to return to town due to dangerous conditions, he was reluctantly allowed to shelter in the family's barn rather than the main house. During that night, he documented observations that would later form the basis for one of the most detailed psychological case studies in early Appalachian medical literature. From his position in the barn, Dr. Whitman could observe the main house through gaps in the wooden walls. What he witnessed challenged his understanding of normal domestic behavior. Throughout the night, the house was never completely dark. A dim light moved from room to room in a precise pattern, suggesting that someone was conducting a methodical inspection of the interior. More disturbing was the apparent schedule. Every hour, without fail, a different family member would emerge from the house, walk completely around the perimeter of the building, then return inside. The doctor's most unsettling observation came near dawn, when he witnessed all four family members exit the house simultaneously, gather in their yard, and engage in what appeared to be an intense discussion conducted entirely in whispers. The conversation lasted approximately 20 minutes, after which they returned to the house in single file, maintaining equal distances between themselves. When morning arrived and travel conditions improved, Dr. Whitman attempted to discuss his observations with the family. Their response was immediate and coordinated. Samuel announced that they would no longer require medical services. Thomas stated that they were managing their concerns internally. Martha thanked the doctor for his previous assistance, and Elizabeth wished him safe travel. The dismissal was polite but absolute, and Dr. Whitman found himself escorted to the edge of the property with firm but respectful insistence. The doctor's final entry regarding the Carter family, dated December 15, 1899, reflected his professional frustration and growing concern. He wrote, "I have encountered isolated families before and understand the psychological effects of extended solitude. However, the Carters exhibit symptoms that suggest they are not merely withdrawn from outside contact, but are actively engaged in some form of internal conflict or surveillance that they refuse to explain or abandon." Winter of 1899-1900 brought a silence that extended far beyond normal seasonal isolation. No smoke was observed rising from the Carter chimney during the coldest months, despite temperatures that made heating essential for survival. Neighboring families, though distant, noted the absence of the usual sounds associated with winter activities. No wood chopping, no animal feeding, no voices carrying across the snow-covered valleys. The mystery deepened when spring arrived. Jake Morrison, a logger working on timber rights near Cheat River, reported that the Carter property appeared abandoned. The house stood intact but showed signs of having been empty for months. Windows were boarded from the inside, and the front door was secured with multiple locks and barricades, visible through gaps in the wooden shutters. Morrison's report prompted Sheriff Daniel Hayes to organize an official investigation in April 1900. The sheriff's party included 3 deputies and Dr. Whitman, who volunteered to assist based on his previous contact with the family. What they discovered at the Carter homestead defied easy explanation and would be discussed in whispers throughout Tucker County for generations. The house itself was structurally sound, but had been modified extensively during the winter months. Every window had been covered with thick wooden boards nailed from the interior. The front door was secured with an elaborate system of locks, bars, and barriers that would have made entry from outside nearly impossible, but more significantly, would have made exit from inside equally difficult. When the sheriff's party finally gained entry by removing boards from a rear window, they found the interior of the house arranged in a manner that suggested the family had been living under siege conditions. Furniture had been moved to create sight lines throughout the main floor, with chairs positioned to allow observation of all entrances simultaneously. Sleeping areas had been arranged in the center of rooms, away from walls, and appeared to have been used in rotation based on the pattern of wear. Most disturbing was the evidence of systematic documentation found throughout the house. Carved into wooden surfaces, written on walls, and recorded on scraps of paper, were detailed logs of observations. These notes, written in different handwriting styles suggesting each family member contributed, documented sounds, movements, and occurrences with the precision of military reconnaissance. The logs revealed that the Carter family had spent their final months at the homestead engaged in round-the-clock monitoring of their environment. Entries recorded the exact times of footsteps overhead when family members were accounted for on the main floor. Detailed descriptions documented voices heard in rooms that were confirmed empty. Most chilling were repeated references to the pattern and the schedule, suggesting that whatever they believed they were observing followed a predictable routine. Sheriff Hayes's official report, filed with the state authorities in Charleston, noted that the family's personal belongings remained in the house, including money, valuable items, and winter clothing essential for survival. Their livestock had died during the winter months, apparently from neglect rather than predation or disease. The family themselves had vanished completely, leaving no trail or indication of their departure method. The investigation expanded when Dr. Whitman, examining the carved notations more carefully, realized they followed a specific pattern. The observations were not random recordings of unusual events, but systematic documentation of occurrences that followed a 24-hour cycle. According to the family's notes, whatever they believed they were monitoring began each day at precisely 3:17 a.m. and continued through a series of predictable stages until 3:16 a.m. the following morning. What made the documentation particularly disturbing was its consistency. The logs covered a period of approximately 4 months, from early September 1899 through early January 1900. During this entire period, according to their meticulous records, the observed pattern never varied by more than a few minutes. The family had documented sounds, movements, and occurrences with scientific precision, creating a record that suggested either shared psychological delusion or genuine awareness of phenomena that outside observers could not detect. Dr. Whitman's analysis of the family's written records, submitted to the West Virginia State Medical Board in 1901, proposed that the Carters had developed a collective psychological condition resulting from extreme isolation and mutual reinforcement of paranoid observations. However, his medical opinion was challenged by inconsistencies in the evidence that he could not adequately explain. The most significant inconsistency involved the family's apparent expertise in documenting structural sounds. Their notes demonstrated detailed knowledge of building acoustics, identifying specific locations within the house based on subtle differences in sound characteristics. They had mapped the house's acoustic properties with precision that suggested either extensive architectural knowledge or months of careful study. Given that Samuel Carter's background was in agriculture and none of the family members had construction experience, their expertise in identifying structural sounds raised questions about the source of their knowledge. Further investigation revealed that the Carter family's modifications to their house included alterations that served no apparent practical purpose, but demonstrated sophisticated understanding of sound transmission and observation techniques. Interior walls had been modified to create listening points at specific locations. Floorboards had been carefully adjusted to eliminate creaking in pathways used for movement during their nighttime observations. These modifications required both technical knowledge and considerable time investment, suggesting that the family's concerns were not sudden paranoid episodes, but carefully planned responses to genuine perceived threats. The mystery of the Carter family's disappearance deepened when searchers discovered evidence of their survival through most of the winter of 1899-1900. Hidden food caches, carefully concealed throughout the property, contained provisions sufficient to sustain 4 adults for several months. The location and construction of these caches demonstrated knowledge of food preservation and concealment techniques, typically associated with military or survival training, skills that none of the family members possessed, according to their background records. Most puzzling was the discovery of a detailed evacuation plan carved into the wooden floor beneath a removable section in the main room. The plan outlined multiple escape routes from the house, including passages through areas that appeared impassable during winter months. Each route was marked with specific timing notes, distances, and landmark references that demonstrated intimate familiarity with the surrounding terrain, even under adverse conditions. The evacuation plan's sophistication raised questions about the family's reasons for remaining at the homestead through the dangerous winter months, rather than implementing their carefully prepared departure strategy. Dr. Whitman's analysis suggested that the family believed the optimal time for their departure had not yet arrived, indicating they were monitoring specific conditions or waiting for particular circumstances that would make their evacuation both necessary and feasible. In June 1900, the investigation took an unexpected direction when loggers working on railroad survey routes discovered evidence of human habitation in caves located approximately 8 miles southeast of the Carter property. The caves, hidden within limestone formations near the Dry Fork tributary, contained clear signs of recent occupation by multiple individuals. The cave system had been modified extensively with carved sleeping areas, food storage locations, and an elaborate system of carved channels designed to collect and direct water flow. Most significantly, the caves contained continuation of the detailed observation logs found in the Carter house. These cave recordings, carved directly into stone surfaces, documented observations of the abandoned homestead from a distance. According to the cave logs, the Carter family had maintained surveillance of their former residence for several weeks after their departure. Their notes described daily visits by unknown individuals who appeared to be conducting systematic searches of the property. These observations were recorded with the same meticulous precision that characterized their house logs, including exact timing, behavior patterns, and detailed descriptions of the searchers' activities. The family's cave records indicated that the individuals searching their abandoned homestead were not random visitors or curious neighbors, but appeared to be conducting organized surveillance operations. The searchers arrived in groups of 3 or 4, maintained specific positions around the property, and followed systematic search patterns that suggested military or law enforcement training. What disturbed investigators most was the family's apparent familiarity with their observers' identities. The cave logs referred to the searchers by specific descriptions rather than generic terms, suggesting previous contact or extended observation. References to the tall one with the limp, the one who checks the barn twice, and the leader who never enters the house indicated that the Carter family had been studying these individuals with the same intensity they had previously applied to monitoring their house. The final entries in the cave logs, dated February 1900, suggested that the family had identified a pattern in their observers' visits that convinced them to abandon the area permanently. Their last recorded observation noted that the schedule has changed and they know we are watching. The logs ended abruptly with the notation, "Time to move beyond the mountain." Sheriff Hayes organized an expanded search of the surrounding mountain regions in summer 1900, but found no further evidence of the Carter family's whereabouts. The caves were abandoned, with signs suggesting a hasty departure. Personal items left behind indicated that the family had prepared for extended travel, but had not planned to return to the area. The investigation might have concluded as simply another case of mountain family choosing extreme isolation, except for discoveries made during the search that raised disturbing questions about the identity and motivations of the individuals who had been surveilling the Carter property. Local residents, when questioned systematically, revealed that unfamiliar men had been observed in the area around the Carter homestead beginning in late summer 1899, several weeks before the family's behavior became noticeably altered. These individuals, described consistently as well-dressed and carrying surveying equipment, had asked detailed questions about the Carter family's habits, schedules, and property boundaries. The questioning revealed a pattern of systematic intelligence gathering that preceded the family's psychological deterioration by several weeks. The strangers had inquired about the family's social connections, their reasons for choosing such an isolated location, and their financial resources. Most significantly, they had asked specific questions about the family's knowledge of mineral deposits on their property. Dr. Whitman's review of the investigation findings led him to propose a disturbing alternative theory about the Carter family's behavior. In his report to state authorities, he suggested that the family's elaborate monitoring system and eventual disappearance might have been rational responses to genuine surveillance by individuals with undisclosed interests in their property. The doctor's theory was supported by the discovery of recent geological surveys conducted in the area surrounding the Carter homestead. These surveys, commissioned by unnamed parties and conducted without local notification, had identified significant coal deposits beneath the family's land. The surveys had been completed in late 1899, coinciding exactly with the period when the family's behavior became increasingly paranoid and defensive. Further investigation revealed that the Carter family's federal land grant contained unusual mineral rights provisions that would have made their property extremely valuable if coal extraction became economically viable. The family appeared to have been unaware of these provisions when they purchased the land, but their behavior suggested they had subsequently learned of the potential value of their holdings. The timeline of events suggested a calculated campaign to pressure the Carter family into abandoning their land claim. The systematic surveillance, the apparent monitoring of their activities, and the psychological pressure created by constant observation would have made continued residence at the homestead increasingly unbearable. The family's meticulous documentation of their observers' activities indicated they understood they were being deliberately intimidated. Sheriff Hayes's final report, submitted to state authorities in September 1900, concluded that the Carter family had been the victims of an organized effort to force them from legally held property for undisclosed commercial purposes. However, his recommendations for further investigation were never implemented, and the case was officially classified as unsolved disappearance with no criminal charges filed. The Carter homestead was abandoned and eventually reclaimed by the state for unpaid taxes in 1903. In 1904, the property was sold at public auction to a mining consortium based in Charleston. Coal extraction operations began on the site in 1905, confirming the presence of valuable mineral deposits that had been identified in the unauthorized surveys. Dr. Whitman continued his interest in the case and attempted to locate the Carter family through medical records and personal inquiries throughout West Virginia and neighboring states. His search was unsuccessful, but he documented several unconfirmed reports of families matching the Carters' description living in extreme isolation in remote areas of Virginia, Kentucky, and Tennessee. In 1908, Dr. Whitman received an unsigned letter postmarked from Lexington, Kentucky, that contained detailed knowledge of the Carter case that had never been made public. The letter thanked him for his professional discretion and genuine concern, and assured him that we have found peace in a place where they cannot follow. The letter's author demonstrated intimate familiarity with the investigation details and included information about the Carter family's cave observations that had not been released to the public. The letter's most disturbing revelation was its suggestion that the Carter family's experience was not unique. The author wrote, "Others like us have learned to recognize the signs and leave before the watching becomes too intense. The mountains are full of families who have discovered that owning valuable land can be more dangerous than poverty." Dr. Whitman's attempts to respond to the letter were unsuccessful, as subsequent letters sent to the postmark location were returned unopened. However, the letter's claims prompted him to investigate similar cases of isolated families abandoning valuable properties under mysterious circumstances. His research, conducted privately and never officially published, identified patterns of suspected intimidation and forced relocation throughout the Appalachian region during the early coal mining expansion period. In 1912, Dr. Whitman published a medical paper titled "Collective Psychological Responses to Environmental Stressors in Isolated Populations" that described the Carter case in clinical terms without identifying specific individuals or locations. The paper argued that families subjected to sustained psychological pressure could develop sophisticated defensive behaviors that might appear paranoid to outside observers, but represented rational adaptations to genuine threats. The paper attracted attention from medical researchers studying the psychological effects of industrial expansion on rural communities, but did not result in renewed official interest in the Carter case. Dr. Whitman's recommendations for investigating similar cases were not pursued by state authorities, and the patterns he identified were never subjected to systematic study. The Carter homestead site remained an active coal mining operation until 1924, when the deposits were exhausted and the mining consortium abandoned the property. The original house, which had survived 10 years of mining activity, was demolished, and the land was left to revert to its natural state. In 1935, a Works Progress Administration archaeological survey of historical sites in Tucker County included a brief examination of the former Carter property. The survey team found remnants of the family's elaborate modification to their house, including carved observation posts and the acoustic modifications noted in the original investigation. The survey report noted that the modifications demonstrated unexpected sophistication in defensive preparation by non-military personnel. FIA. The WPA survey also located and documented the cave system where the Carter family had sheltered after abandoning their homestead. The carved observation logs remained clearly visible and provided the most complete record of the family's final months in the area. The survey team's analysis confirmed that the logs demonstrated knowledge and observational skills that exceeded what would be expected from ordinary farming families. Most significantly, the WPA survey discovered additional carved notations in the caves that had not been found during the original investigation. These later carvings, apparently added after the family's departure, contained warnings directed toward future visitors. The warnings advised others like us to avoid the pattern, trust the silence, and leave before they learn you are watching them watch. The implications of these additional carvings suggested that the Carter family believed their experience was part of a larger pattern that could affect others who found themselves in similar circumstances. The warnings demonstrated their continued concern for individuals who might face comparable situations, indicating that their departure from the area had not resolved their sense of responsibility toward potential future victims. The WPA survey report was filed with state historical archives and forgotten until 1962, when a graduate student in anthropology at West Virginia University discovered the documents during research into 19th century settlement patterns. The student's thesis proposal to conduct further investigation of the Carter case was rejected by the university's review board as lacking sufficient academic merit for advanced study. In 1965, the former Carter property was purchased by the state of West Virginia as part of a reforestation project designed to restore areas damaged by early mining operations. The purchase required clearance of all previous claims and investigations, resulting in the official closure of any outstanding questions regarding the Carter family's disappearance. The case file was transferred to the West Virginia State Archives with a classification that restricted access to qualified researchers. However, budget constraints and staff limitations resulted in most early 20th century case files being stored without proper cataloging, making the Carter investigation effectively inaccessible to future inquiry. Dr. Whitman died in 1943, having never learned the ultimate fate of the Carter family. His personal papers, donated to the West Virginia Medical Association after his death, included extensive notes on similar cases of families abandoning valuable properties under suspicious circumstances. The notes suggested that the Carter case was part of a pattern that extended throughout the coal mining regions of Appalachia during the early industrial expansion period. The doctor's research identified at least 12 similar cases between 1895 and 1910 involving families who owned land with mineral value and subsequently disappeared after reporting surveillance and intimidation by unknown individuals. However, his notes also indicated that investigating these patterns had become personally dangerous, as individuals asking questions about these cases experienced their own harassment and surveillance. Dr. Whitman's final notation regarding the Carter case, dated 1941, reflected his continued frustration with the unsolved mystery. 42 years have passed since the Carter family disappeared from their homestead. In that time, I have learned that asking questions about their fate attracts the same kind of attention that originally drove them away. Perhaps their greatest wisdom lay in understanding when to stop fighting and simply vanish. Today, the former Carter property lies within the boundaries of the Monongahela National Forest. The site of their homestead is marked only by a few foundation stones and the remnants of their elaborate defensive modifications, which remain visible to trained observers. The caves where they sheltered are blocked by natural rockfall that occurred sometime after 1945, making access to their final carved messages impossible. Hikers and hunters occasionally report finding carved warnings in trees and rock faces throughout the area, suggesting that the Carter family or others sharing their experience continued to mark the territory with advisory messages for years after their disappearance. However, these reports cannot be verified, as the carvings deteriorate quickly in the mountain climate and may represent natural patterns interpreted as deliberate markings. The Tucker County Historical Society maintains a brief reference to the Carter family in their records of early settlers, but the entry contains no mention of the circumstances of their disappearance or the investigation that followed. Local residents who remember hearing stories about the family describe them simply as people who couldn't handle the isolation and left for more populated areas. The coal deposits beneath the former Carter property were completely extracted by 1924, yielding profits that exceeded initial estimates by several 100%. The mining rights changed hands multiple times between 1904 and 1920, but the identity of the original purchasers remains unclear due to incomplete corporate records from the period. Recent geological surveys of the Monongahela National Forest have identified additional mineral deposits throughout the region that were not economically viable during the early 20th century, but have become valuable due to technological advances. These surveys are conducted by federal agencies and private contractors without local notification, following procedures established during the original coal mining expansion period. Environmental historians studying the early industrial development of West Virginia note that the state's mineral rights laws from the late 19th century created situations where property owners could be unaware of the commercial value of their holdings until mining interests had already identified and claimed extraction rights. These legal frameworks facilitated rapid resource extraction, but often resulted in displacement of established residents through methods that were technically legal but practically coercive. The Carter family's case represents one of the few documented instances where the targeted property owners recognized the systematic nature of the pressure being applied against them and responded with organized resistance rather than simply abandoning their claims. Their meticulous documentation of surveillance activities and their sophisticated defensive preparations suggest they understood the economic and political forces driving their persecution. However, their ultimate disappearance indicates that individual resistance to these pressures was ultimately ineffective against organized economic interests backed by legal and political resources. The family's careful preparation and strategic thinking merely delay their departure rather than enabling them to maintain their property rights. The lessons embedded in the Carter family's experience extend beyond their individual case to reflect broader patterns in American industrial development during periods of rapid resource extraction. Their story illustrates the human cost of economic expansion conducted without adequate protection for individual property rights or consideration of existing community structures. Perhaps most significantly, the Carter family's response to their situation demonstrates the psychological resilience of individuals faced with systematic intimidation. Rather than accepting their powerlessness, they developed sophisticated methods of understanding and documenting the forces working against them. Their survival through months of psychological pressure and successful evacuation under dangerous conditions required intelligence, cooperation, and determination that contradicted assumptions about the capabilities of ordinary rural families. Their decision to leave carved warnings for others indicates that they viewed their experience as part of a larger pattern that threatened similar families throughout the region. Even after ensuring their own survival, they maintained concern for potential future victims and attempted to provide guidance based on their hard-earned understanding of the tactics used against them. The Carter family's ultimate fate remains unknown. They succeeded in disappearing completely from official records and avoiding recapture by the forces that had driven them from their homestead. Whether they found permanent safety in a distant location or continued to move from place to avoid detection cannot be determined from available evidence. What can be confirmed is that they developed extraordinary skills in observation, documentation, defensive preparation, and strategic planning under extreme psychological pressure. They transformed from ordinary rural residents into sophisticated operators, capable of sustained resistance against organized intimidation. Their adaptation represents one of the most remarkable examples of civilian response to coordinated harassment in documented American history. The silence that has surrounded their case for over a century suggests that the interests responsible for their original persecution maintained influence sufficient to discourage continued investigation. The classification and restricted access imposed on their case files indicates that official acknowledgement of the systematic nature of their harassment was considered inadvisable, even decades after the events occurred. Today, visitors to the Monongahela National Forest who know the location of the former Carter homestead can still observe evidence of the family's extraordinary efforts to understand and resist the forces that ultimately drove them away. The modified foundation stones, the carefully planned sight lines, and the remnants of their acoustic monitoring system remain as testament to their refusal to accept victimization without resistance. Their story serves as a reminder that the official historical record often omits the experiences of the individuals who challenged powerful economic interests during periods of rapid industrial expansion. The Carter family's meticulous documentation of their harassment and their sophisticated defensive response provide rare insight into the human reality behind the statistics of rural displacement during America's early industrial development. The terror they experienced was not supernatural, but profoundly human in its systematic nature and calculated psychological impact. Their response demonstrated that ordinary people, when faced with extraordinary pressure, could develop remarkable capabilities for understanding and resisting organized intimidation. Their ultimate disappearance represents both the limitations of individual resistance and the extraordinary lengths to which people will go to maintain their freedom and dignity when faced with systematic persecution. The mountains of West Virginia continue to hold secrets about the families who were displaced during the early coal mining period. The Carter family's story represents only one documented case among many that likely remain hidden in restricted archives or lost entirely to time. Their legacy lies not in the mystery of their ultimate fate, but in their demonstration that systematic harassment can be recognized, documented, and resisted even when it cannot ultimately be defeated. Their carved warnings remain scattered throughout the region, slowly weathering away but continuing to serve their intended purpose of alerting others to patterns of intimidation that persist across generations. The Carter family understood that their individual survival was less important than ensuring that their knowledge could benefit others who might face similar challenges. In the end, the most terrifying aspect of their experience was not the supernatural haunting suggested by early accounts, but the very human calculation behind the systematic destruction of their peace, security, and ultimately their ability to remain in their chosen home. They faced the horror of discovering that their property ownership, their legal rights, and their legitimate expectations of safety meant nothing when confronted with organized economic interests supported by political and legal structures designed to facilitate resource extraction regardless of human cost. Their story continues to resonate because the fundamental conflict they faced between individual rights and organized economic power remains relevant across different eras and contexts. The Carter family's experience serves as both warning and inspiration, demonstrating that while individual resistance may not always succeed in practical terms, the act of resistance itself serves important purposes in documenting injustice, preserving human dignity, and providing guidance for others who may face similar challenges. The terror that drove the Carter family from their homestead was the terror of powerlessness in the face of systematic oppression, disguised as legal business practice. Their response was to transform that terror into understanding, resistance, and ultimately a form of victory through survival and escape. Their legacy lies in the proof that even under impossible circumstances, ordinary people can develop extraordinary capabilities when fighting for their fundamental right to exist with dignity and security.